Have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking, so raw, that it makes you question the very meaning of kindness? A moment where one powerful decision seems to crush another person's dignity in seconds, but then, out of nowhere, one soft and innocent voice changes everything. If you want to hear a story that will touch your heart and remind you why kindness matters more than money, then stay with me till the very end. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, because stories like these are not just stories, they're lessons that stay with us for life. It was an ordinary Monday morning in the mansion of Mr. Raymond Clark, a self-made millionaire who was respected in business but feared in his household. His company was thriving, his investments were multiplying, and his reputation in the corporate world was that of a strong, disciplined man who never tolerated mistakes. But behind the glass walls of his skyscraper office and the gold gates of his mansion, there was a side of him that most didn't see. He was a perfectionist to the point of cruelty, especially with those who served him. His daughter, Emily, a bright 9-year-old girl with golden curls and an innocence untouched by her father's hardened world, often watched in silence as he raised his voice at drivers, gardeners, and even the maids who worked tirelessly in the house. Among those maids was Rosa, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes and a weary smile who had been with the family for nearly 5 years. Rosa wasn't just a maid, she was the quiet strength of the household, the one who noticed Emily's moods, who braided her hair before school, who left little notes of encouragement on her bedside when Emily was nervous about a test. Rosa worked long hours, often sacrificing her own health, but she never complained. That morning, as Emily sat at the long dining table nibbling on toast, she overheard her father's sharp voice echoing through the kitchen. Raymond had found a mistake. A glass vase, a family heirloom, had been accidentally broken. It wasn't valuable compared to his wealth, but for Raymond, it was the principle. He stormed into the kitchen, his expensive shoes clacking against the polished floor, his face hardened like stone. Rosa stood trembling by the sink, her hands nervously twisting a dish towel. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Raymond snapped, his voice cold enough to freeze the air. "This vase was in this family for generations, and you treat it like garbage. I pay you, I feed you, and this is how you repay me?" Rosa's lips trembled, but she bowed her head and whispered, "I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident." "I didn't mean," but Raymond didn't let her finish. His pride and temper were stronger than his reason. In front of his daughter, he pointed at the door and said the words that fell like a hammer, "You're fired. Get out. Now." The room fell into silence. Emily's fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto the plate. Her wide, innocent eyes turned from her father's towering figure to Rosa's trembling shoulders. She had never seen her father so ruthless in person before. Rosa's hands shook as she wiped her tears, whispering apologies again and again, but Raymond's face remained as cold as steel. He thought he was teaching a lesson about responsibility, but Emily saw something else entirely. She saw cruelty. She saw a woman who had cared for her like a second mother being stripped of her dignity in a moment. Rosa slowly picked up her small purse, her shoulders slouched in defeat, and began to walk toward the door. That's when it happened. Emily, with her little voice quivering but brave, stood up and said one sentence that made the entire mansion fall silent. "Daddy, if you can fire someone for one mistake, then maybe you should fire yourself too." The word struck harder than any argument could. For a man who had built empires, crushed competition, and prided himself on power, nothing had ever shaken him like the truth from the mouth of his own daughter. Raymond turned slowly, his chest tightening, his breath uneven. Rosa froze in her steps, turning back with disbelief. Emily's voice cracked as tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't back down. "You always tell me that everyone makes mistakes, and that's how we learn. Rosa made one mistake, and you destroyed her for it. But you make mistakes too, Daddy. You forget my school projects sometimes, you miss my plays, you yell at people even when it's not their fault. Should I fire you too?" Raymond's face turned pale. For the first time in years, someone had held a mirror to his behavior. And it wasn't his business rival, not a journalist, not even a board member. It was his daughter. The one person whose opinion of him mattered more than the world's. The silence grew heavy, filled only with the sound of Emily's soft sobs. Rosa's heart ached as she watched, torn between gratitude and guilt. She wanted to tell Emily it was okay, that she didn't have to defend her, but inside she knew the child had spoken a truth that no adult dared to. Raymond clenched his jaw, his pride fighting with his conscience. He wanted to maintain his authority, but his daughter's tears pierced deeper than his ego could reach. For a man who thought money solved everything, he suddenly felt powerless. And in that powerlessness, he began to feel something unfamiliar, shame. The chapter of that morning didn't end with a resolution yet. Rosa still stood by the door, her heart pounding with uncertainty. Emily sat back in her chair, her small body trembling with the courage it had taken to speak those words. And Raymond, the millionaire who thought he had everything, realized that in his pursuit of power, he might be losing the one thing that mattered most, the respect and love of his child. The moment passed in silence, but the echo of Emily's sentence lingered like thunder in Raymond's heart. It was a sentence that would change everything, not only for Rosa but for him too. Because sometimes, the greatest lessons in kindness don't come from the powerful, they come from the innocent voices we least expect. That night, Raymond couldn't sleep. The mansion was quiet, but his mind was loud with guilt. He paced in his study, staring at the fire crackling in the marble fireplace, remembering the look in his daughter's eyes. Not fear, not disappointment, but heartbreak. For years, he had believed that strength meant authority, that respect came from discipline, that money could buy loyalty. But his daughter had reminded him that true strength wasn't in control, but in compassion. He thought of Rosa, the woman who had worked tirelessly in his home, who had cared for Emily in ways he himself hadn't. He remembered the times Rosa had stayed late when Emily was sick, how she had read her bedtime stories when he was away on business trips, how she had stitched torn dresses and mended not just clothes, but moments of childhood that he had missed. And he had repaid her with cruelty. In the quiet of the night, Raymond made a decision. The next morning, instead of heading to his office, he drove to the small neighborhood on the other side of town where Rosa lived. It was nothing like his world, narrow streets, small brick houses, laundry hanging on lines. He parked his sleek black car outside and felt out of place, almost ashamed to step out. Children played barefoot in the dusty street, their laughter contrasting sharply with the heaviness in his chest. He asked around until he found Rosa's modest home, a place barely holding together but filled with warmth. He knocked, and after a few moments, Rosa opened the door, her eyes widening in shock. "Mr. Clark," she whispered, her voice unsure. She had never imagined he would come here. Her first instinct was fear. Had she done something else wrong? But then she saw his face, not cold and stern as usual, but soft and weary. "Rosa," he began, his voice lower than she'd ever heard, "I came to apologize." The words felt foreign on his tongue, but once spoken, they brought a strange relief. He explained how wrong he had been, how Emily's words had opened his eyes, how he had realized that money and authority meant nothing if he couldn't treat people with kindness. Tears welled in Rosa's eyes as she listened, not because she needed his apology, but because she knew how much it cost a man like him to humble himself. He asked her to come back, but more than that, he promised that things would change, not just in his home, but in the way he treated people everywhere. Rosa agreed, not out of desperation for her job, but because she saw sincerity in his eyes. She returned to the mansion that evening, where Emily ran into her arms with joy. "I knew Daddy would listen," Emily whispered, and in that moment, Rosa realized the power of a child's heart, a heart that believed in kindness even when the world was cruel. From that day on, Raymond began to change. Slowly at first, awkwardly even, but genuinely. He greeted his staff with respect. He listened instead of shouting. He spent more time with Emily, learning from her what true kindness looked like. And though he was still a millionaire, still powerful, he no longer measured his worth by wealth or control. He measured it by the love in his daughter's eyes and the gratitude in the people around him. Years later, when Emily grew older, she often told the story of the day her father fired Rosa in anger, only for one sentence to change everything. It became a story she carried into adulthood, a story she told her friends, her own children, a story that reminded her that even the hardest hearts can be softened by kindness. And every time she told it, she would end with the same words her father had finally learned to live by: kindness is not weakness. It is the greatest strength of all. So, if you've stayed with me till now, let this story remind you too: never underestimate the power of one sentence, one act of kindness, or one child's innocent heart. If this story touched you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, because more stories like this are waiting to inspire you. And who knows? The next story of kindness might just change your life too.